our lecture. Next, we want to go through another term, which is actually called the monetary base. Okay, monetary base or MB, monetary base or MB. Now, remember the two liability components of the central bank. We're talking about the central bank, okay, not the commercial banks AB we have seen. But think about the central bank, currency and reserves. Currency and reserves, that means total reserves that the central bank itself has, and the total currency that it has, these two make up what is known as the monetary base.
ম্যাম
Yes. Any problem?
এমডি ম্যাম এমডি ইউসুফ আলী হচ্ছে প্রেজেন্ট, ওর হচ্ছে মাইক্রোফোনের সমস্যা, তো বলছে যে প্রেজেন্ট কিন্তু আপনি শুনেন নাই।
Okay. MD Yusuf.
জি ম্যাম।
Okay. Okay, I've done it. You could have sent a message. Did you send a message?
হ্যাঁ ম্যাম পাঠাইছি
Yeah, yeah,
মেসেজ।
yeah. You have. I would have seen it anyways and I would have fixed it. Don't worry. Okay. All right. So if you don't have, if your microphone is not working or if you're not able to speak at this time, just write on the message, just say that I'm present. Then when I close the screen, I will see and I will give you present. Don't worry. Okay. So we are talking about monetary base. So the total currency in circulation and the reserves, total reserves, both of these make up something called the monetary base. Okay, it's known by many names, but I will always refer to as monetary base in my class. It's known as reserve money, it's known as base money or high money, but this is actually called, but what we like to call is monetary base. This is the amount of money under the control of the central bank. That is, the central bank can directly influence the monetary base through its monetary policy. We will see this in the next monetary policy part in the next class. Thus, we have total currency in circulation plus total reserves that are there. If you add them up, you will get the monetary base. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, slide number 17. This is basically a diagram which shows you the relationship between monetary base and narrow money. Okay, please try to recall what narrow money or M1 is. M1 is basically all the currency in circulation plus all the current account and short term deposits, the savings accounts and short run, basically checkable deposits or current account. And monetary base is currency in circulation plus reserves. Okay, now as you can see, you have in this very interesting diagram, this represents both M1 and MB. MB here stands for monetary base. So you see the currency is common in both, right? Because both have currency calculated in it. So this part is the same, but you can see deposit amount is way higher than the total reserve, because remember, uh, deposit, from the deposit you have the reserve, and by reserve here I mean the required reserve, the reserve amount that the central bank has in its vault, and that is basically the required reserve that the commercial banks give to the central bank, right? So you can see the deposit, total deposit amount will be higher, but the reserve amount is smaller, right? So you can see they have just tried to show you the difference in money supply and monetary base. So they have a common quantity, one of them is currency, and they have a different quantity, which is deposit for money supply, M1, and monetary base, for that you have reserve. That means the required reserve, by the way. Okay. This diagram is not so important because I will never ask you to draw this diagram. This is just for your understanding. What we need to do is we need to be able to solve questions based on these topics. Okay, So we are now going to look at slide number 18, and we're trying to solve the math that you can see. Okay. So all of you can see the writing properly, or is the writing too small? Can you see the clearly? Can you see the words? I hope you can. Okay, so I'm reading out the question. So this is solved question number 3. Government of Islandia uses, okay, we can just continue. The Central Bank of Islandia imposes a required reserve ratio of 10%. Given the following information, answer the questions below. So what information we have is number 1. Our information is that the CRR is 10% or 0.1. Next information. The total bank deposit at the central bank is 200 million. So basically you understand this is the required reserve amount, because this is the bank deposit at the central bank. And remember, central bank contains as deposits all the money that the commercial banks submit as required reserve. So this 200 million is the required reserves. Currency held by public. So this is basically the currency in circulation, 150 million. Currency in bank vault. So this is basically commercial banks still have 100 million in their bank vault. So this is the excess reserves. Okay. Checkable bank deposit. So this is basically the bank current accounts in the banks. Okay. So hopefully you have understood what these information. So we have now 5 information with us. Okay, 5 different information. Number 1 question, number part A. What is M1? So here they want you to say what is the value of M1. So remember, M1 is basically currency in circulation plus checkable bank deposits. So it will be 150 million plus 500 million. So the answer will be 650 million. Is there any question regarding this? Is it clear how we found out the M1 in this case? Okay. Silence will mean there's no problem. So if anyone has a problem, just unmute your microphone and you can answer. Okay. And I'm also looking at the chat box. So far I see no one has any question. Okay, so let's get back. Number B. What is the monetary base? So here again the question is, what is the value of the monetary base? Okay. So remember the formula for monetary base: currency in circulation plus required reserves, right? Okay. Currency in banks, reserves of the commercial bank. Okay, here look, monetary base is the sum of the currency held by the public, so 150 million, and the reserves of the commercial banks. Okay, so here I don't think this should be commercial bank also. Reserves of the, okay, and the reserves of the commercial banks currently in bank vaults 100 million, and the bank deposits at the central bank 200 million. So if you add all these up, 200 plus 100 plus 150, the monetary base is 450. Okay, from what I understand in this question, the monetary base, so go back to slide number 16. Here in the monetary base, the reserve are, this is actually total reserve. This is not just required reserve, this is total reserve. So this is excess reserve plus required reserves. Okay, so please make sure you understand this part. Then we have part C. Are the
ম্যাম
commercial
স্লাইড
banks,
দেখা যাচ্ছে না,
sorry?
ম্যাম স্লাইড দেখা যাচ্ছে না।
ম্যাম দেখা যায় না।
Okay, I will try one more time. Can you see now?
No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. দেখা যাচ্ছে.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am. এখন দেখছি.
okay, okay. So remember, let me repeat. Monetary base is equal to the sum of currency held by public plus total reserves. So that means plus required reserves plus excess reserves. Okay, so don't forget that. Now let's look at the question number C. Are the commercial banks holding excess reserves? So now the question is, are the banks holding excess reserves? Um, Required reserves are 50 million. And how did you find it out? Because remember that 10% of 500 million, because remember our 500 million is the total checkable bank deposit. So from here 10% is 50 million. Now, because total reserves are 300 million, that means currency in bank vault plus bank deposits at the central bank, the commercial banks are holding 250 million in excess reserves. Now, let me explain to you. This might sound a little bit confusing, but first look at the numbers. Go back to the information that you have. Currently, the central bank is holding $200 million. Okay, and remember this $200 million has come from the commercial bank because the commercial bank has deposited money in the central bank. Okay, and at the same time the bank also itself has $100 million with itself. However, the required reserves depends on the checkable bank deposit that the commercial bank has. In this example, the checkable bank deposit is $500 million, right? So if we just use our CRR to $500 million, so 10% of $500 million is 50 million. So in reality, the commercial bank was obligated to deposit only $50 million to the central bank as the deposit, right? So in reality, how much money did it give to the bank in any case? You can see that the total reserve is 300. Okay, how? Because look, 200 is already given to the bank, central bank, and it also has extra 100 million, right? So total it has reserves 300 million. From this, only 50 million is the required reserve. So how much is the extra reserve or the excess reserve? It will obviously be 300 million minus 50 million. That's the excess reserve that the bank has. Okay? Any question on this? I hope not. It seems complicated
ম্যাম,
at first, but it's not.
কনফিউজ হয়ে গেছি. আরেকবার একটু বললে ভালো হয়.
Okay. So let me show you. Can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay. So remember here the money that central bank has. Okay? We know that it is $200, right?
So, ma'am, এই মানিটা তো রিকোয়ার্ড রিজার্ভ থেকেই আসছে, তাই না?
We don't know that. All we
ও,
know is that the bank has, that's what we initially thought first, correct? But actually, this is the bank deposit that the money that the central bank already had from before, but we don't know if it's entirely from the required reserve or not. And the thing is, listen, sometimes the banks can actually deposit more money than required reserve. So suppose that the required reserve amount is suppose 100 taka. Okay. Now the commercial banks may choose to deposit say 50 taka. Sorry, 100 taka I said, right? So may actually choose to deposit 200 taka to the central bank. Okay. But this is not the required reserve amount. We need to calculate what the required reserve amount is. So it's the fact that the minimum amount of money should be the required reserve money. That's what I want to say. Okay. The minimum amount that the commercial banks are required to give to the central bank is the required reserve amount. But that does not mean that the banks cannot give extra money to the bank. Is it clear? So
Yes,
instead
ma'am.
of giving the minimum amount,
যদি সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংককে বেশি টাকা দেয় তাতে কমার্শিয়াল ব্যাংকের লাভটা কি?
কোনো লাভ নেই। Rather, you just saw that if it gives out more money, then it has less money to give out as loan, and the lesser money the bank has to give out as loan, the less money it can create, right? So it's actually a loss really to the bank. But the question is not whether it's a loss or a profit. The question is, can the banks do that? The answer is yes. The commercial banks can actually give more money to the central bank. And that's exactly what has happened in this specific question. Okay. So let me show you exactly what has happened. So you see, this is the information we have. The central bank currently has $200 million. Let's call it $200 in its account, in its as bank deposit. Currency in bank vault, bank commercial bank vaults is $100. Checkable bank deposits is 500 million. Okay, and given CRR is equal to 10%. Okay, so far we know this, and we don't need currency held by public. We don't need this amount right now. So now the question is, are the commercial banks holding excess reserves? That is the question. Now remember what is excess reserve. If you go back to your slide, excess reserves, let's go back here. See, excess reserve is total reserves minus required reserves. So we need to find out what the excess reserve is. If we know the total reserves and if we know the required reserves, we can easily find it. Okay, so that's what we are trying to do. So first tell me, what is the total reserves? So here, total reserve, or let's call it TR. Let's go back to our information we have. So first look, currency in bank vault. Remember, this is part of its total reserve, right? Currency in bank vault. So it has some money in the bank vaults. That is definitely part of its reserves. 100. Okay. And also the bank deposits at the central bank. So you see, central, now remember, there's only one bank. In this specific example, we are only talking about this one bank, one commercial bank, one central bank. Okay. So obviously the 200 million that is there in the central bank is deposited by the commercial bank, right? So this money also belongs to the commercial bank. So therefore plus 200. So what's the total reserve? 300 million. Okay. Now this is the total reserves that it has. But now the question is, what is the required reserve in this scenario? Now remember, for the required reserve, the formula is very simple. You multiply the reserve ratio with the total checkable bank deposit. So
বাট
basically
ম্যাম
what,
আমরা তো একটা ম্যাথে ওই যে ব্যাংক ভল্টস থেকে বের করে আনছিলাম রিকোয়ার্ড রিজার্ভটা।
let's go back. Which question was it?
আমার একদম ফার্স্টে যে ব্যাংক এ ব্যাংক বি দিয়ে করা হয়েছিল।
Mm-hmm. No, that question is different. That scenario is different. Okay, don't confuse that with the maths that we are doing now. Here we are looking at, here we were looking at the money creation process.
ওকে।
Okay, but here we are looking at how much money is there as excess reserves. Okay, here basically what we are trying to do is, here we looked at step by step how excess reserve is created, and from that excess reserve we give out loans. But in this question we are not talking about giving loans, we are not talking about step by step um, uh, uh, excess reserve. Here we are talking about the total amount. Okay.
ম্যাম,
Yes.
এখানে সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংকে যে টাকাটা ওটা তো আদার্স কমার্শিয়াল ব্যাংকের ওই যে পার্সেন্টেজ মিলে যেই টোটাল অ্যামাউন্টটা হয়েছে ওই টাকাটা।
No, because if it was the required reserve ratio, required reserve that you're talking about, এখানে লিখা থাকতো, okay, that the required reserve amount of at the central bank. But here they have mentioned bank deposit, so we don't know if it is the required reserve amount only, or is this extra money. We don't know that. That is exactly what we are trying to find out. Okay, that how much money should have been given to the central bank. Okay, that's exactly what we're trying to find out. And to find that out, we first need to check how much money it should give by using checkable bank deposit amount. So here you have to verify. Actually what we're trying to do
সো
is
ম্যাম
we are trying to verify.
কারেন্সি
Mhm.
কারেন্সি ইন ব্যাংক বলস ওইটা থেকে মানে সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংকে কোনো রিকোয়ার্ড রিজার্ভ দিতে হবে না, অনলি কেবল চেকেবল ডিপোজিটের জন্য দিতে দিতে হবে।
Exactly. যদি ব্যাংকে checkable deposit আসে, that means if someone opens a current account or a savings account in the bank, only then will the bank have to give money to the central bank as required reserves. Okay.
ওকে ম্যাম।
Okay, so now we need to check how much money the commercial bank has to give as required reserve to the central bank based on how much money it has in the checkable bank deposit. We can see that 500 million is the money, and you know the CRR is 10%. So 10% into 500 is 50 million. So 50 million should have been the required reserve. But how much reserve does it have in total? 300, right? So if we just deduct from 350, we get 250. Okay? So 250 billion is the million is the excess reserves that the commercial bank has. That's the answer. Okay, please go through this slide again, go through this math and try to practice it yourself. You'll see you understand it better. Next question is, can the commercial banks increase checkable bank deposits? If yes, by how much can checkable bank deposits increase? That's the question. Now remember, so let's go back to our previous this one. So remember, for the example of bank A and B, I told you how the story goes, right? That first there's a new deposit. From that new deposit, some money, that is the required amount, is left as required reserve, which is given to the central bank, and the remaining money is part of the excess reserve, and then from the excess reserve the money is given out as loan, right? So you need excess reserves to give out loan. That's the simple statement. If the banks have excess reserves, only then they will be able to give it out as loan. So same thing here, look, the bank has $250 million, right, as excess reserves. So of course, yes, the bank can increase checkable bank deposits. Okay, please be sure, since the commercial banks are holding excess reserves, they can increase deposits. But now the question is, if yes, by how much can the checkable bank deposits increase? Now they're asking us, if that's true, that there is it's possible, then tell me how much amount total the banks can increase. So you see, with a required reserve ratio of 10%, reserves of 300 can support a total of 300 million divided by 0.1, which is equal to 300 million in deposits. So remember the formula I told you about, that total money creation is equal to the new deposit, or the total initial deposit, I think I wrote initial deposit divided by CRR. So why is initial deposit 300? The reason is, remember, 300 from 300, 300, one second, let me just check, can support a total of 300.
350 মিলিয়ন তো রিকোয়ার্ড রিজার্ভ, এটা তো সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংকের
Oh,
কাছে চলে
yeah,
যাবে।
yeah, yeah. So this one. So look, commercial banks can increase deposits by additional 2,500. So if you just look here, 300 from there, 50 is gone. Yeah. Here there is some error. Okay, here it should be 250. Here it should be 250. I will change these, don't worry. After this class, I'm going to edit these slides a little bit more, and I'm going to correct this. It will be 250 million. You're right here. Because remember, the excess reserves are actually 250. No. This is correct. This is correct. Let me show you. Wait. This is correct. Look at this diagram. Go to slide number 14. Here, try to notice something. $1,000 was deposited, right? In the bank, in bank A. From there, $100 were kept as required reserves, and the remaining money was kept as your excess reserve. We do the same thing here. Let's do the same thing. You will see the answer will be for 3,000. Okay, look. So if I try to create this table, okay, I'm trying to replicate this table in this board here. So this is the new deposit column. This is the required reserves column. This is the excess reserve column. Okay. So this is the new deposit. Remember how much money you're depositing? 300. Okay. 300. What's the okay, we don't need the fourth one. What is the required reserves? 50 million, right? And what is the excess reserve? 250 million.
250
Okay. Then this 250 million is given to, here of course we don't have another bank, we have the same bank. So suppose someone else comes and withdraws this 250, creates another bank account in the same bank, so their 250 will come here, right? From this 250, 10% will go to required reserve. So 10% will be what? 250, no? Nikki, hello?
yes ma'am,
250, right?
yes,
No, 250 is the money, and 10% of 250 is 25.
25, yes,
So 25 will be the required reserve, and the remaining amount will be how much?
225,
225. Good. So this process will go on and on and on and on and on, okay, until this will become 0. So now you tell me, when I calculate CRR, sorry, when I calculate the total amount created, total money created, it will be 300 divided by
300, yes,
0.1. Is this clear now?
ma'am. Yes ma'am.
Okay, good. Okay, so we are actually done. we have done this chapter. This is the end of this chapter. Okay.
ম্যাম
Yes.
কোশ্চেন বিতে
Mm-hmm.
কোশ্চেন বিতে যেটা বলছিল যে ওইটাতে ওই যে ব্যাংক ব্যাংকের কারেন্সিটা কেন আসছে সাম অফ ব্যাংক কারেন্সি এন্ড পাবলিক কারেন্সি
Part B,
হ্যাঁ
because they're asking us for monetary base. What is the amount of monetary base? If you go back to this slide, monetary base is equal to currency in circulation plus reserves. So here, currency in circulation is basically the currency held by public. So that's 150 million plus reserves. So reserves, by reserves they mean the reserves of the commercial bank, which is basically the currency in bank vaults and the bank deposits at the central bank. So total reserves, okay, which we
আচ্ছা
calculated was
দিচ্ছি
$300. Remember, $300 total reserves?
ইয়েস ম্যাম
Yeah, so
ইয়েস
150 plus 300, that's why. Okay, any other question?
ও
So we have finished this chapter about this is money and banking. So we learned at the beginning. So let us have a very quick review and then we'll move on to the next chapter. So we first found out what is money and what are the roles of money. We discussed this in the class at length. So please go and check the class lecture. We also discussed the different types of money that has evolved around the different years.
ম্যাম M1 and M2 টা একটু ডিসক্রাইব করে দিন
Okay, so here we go. There you go, M1, M2. So M1 is also known as narrow money. So narrow money is basically two things. One is currency in circulation. So the amount of money that is at the hands of the public. Okay, that is they are not inside the bank. The currency outside the banks, they are called currency in circulation. So this is the money that is there with the public, okay? The normal people, the money they use every day, that is currency in circulation. And demand deposits in the banking system, this is basically short-term deposits which can be converted to currency easily. So basically your current accounts, your savings accounts and things like that, these small short-term accounts, these are called demand deposits. So if you add the amount of money that is in currency in circulation and the amount of money in the demand deposits in the banking system of Bangladesh, you will get the amount of M1 in Bangladesh, which is the narrow money. Is this part clear?
ইয়েস
Okay.
ম্যাম
And M2 is also called broad money. Broad money is basically your narrow money plus quasi money. What is quasi money? Quasi money here means basically, the long term or long time deposits that people make in banks, basically your FD, your different types of, there are many types of savings deposit in banks, time deposits. That is, there are many deposits that you cannot break in the middle, say for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. Okay, DPS is an example of quasi money. Okay, so FDR, fixed deposit, these are all your quasi money. And at the same time, if you have any foreign currency deposit, that is also part of your quasi money. Okay, so your narrow money, that is M1, plus saving deposits, time deposits, these, and also foreign currency deposits, the money that you have in those form, that will be calculated in broad money. So you just add them up and you get the broad money. Okay.
ওকে ম্যাম
Okay. Then we moved on to the last part of the chapter, which is creation of money in banks. Okay, so we saw the definition of reserves, we saw what is CRR and how we can calculate it, we saw what is excess reserves, and then we moved on to the expansion of money in banks. This part where I showed you with an example what happens when the central bank prints some money and that money is going to the banking system, and how that changes the T account of the banks. And in the end, how much money is totally created, that can also be calculated using a formula, which unfortunately is not in these slides, but I'm going to include that in the slide number 14 here. Okay, so don't worry. And then we just looked at monetary base in the end, what is monetary base and how we can calculate it using this formula. That's all. Okay, so we are done with money and banking. Let's immediately move to the next chapter. Okay, is there anyone who has entered after the roll call? Okay, it seems everyone is present from the beginning. Okay, so we are starting the next chapter, that is monetary policy. Okay, all right. So we are starting. First, we begin this chapter by trying to understand the money market. Okay, and we start money market by understanding what is money demand. Okay, so as you can see on your screen, slide number 2, money demand curve shows the relationship between the interest rate and the quantity of money demanded. Now, please recall in ECO 101, you had done demand and supply, where we looked at the demand and supply of goods and services, right? So there was a downward sloping demand curve and there was an upward sloping supply curve. Same can be thought for money also. If you consider money to be a good or service, you can also calculate or you can draw the money demand curve and the money supply curve. It's possible. Okay. So let us try to see what are the axes. Okay, what are the independent and dependent variables in this case. So you can see already the money demand curve shows the relationship between the interest rate and the quantity of money demanded. So in the x-axis you have quantity of money, just like we used to do for demand for goods and services, quantity. Same here, we have quantity. But you see in the y-axis we don't have price. Instead of price we have interest rate. That's because the price of money is interest rate. Okay, now it's a very curious thing to say that price of money is interest rate. Why I'm saying price of money is interest rate? The reason is people want to hold money depending on what the interest rate is. Because now honestly ask yourself this question: if there's a person, he or she has the option of either holding money or investing in some sort of a project. Okay, this usually does not mean bond, this usually means investment. Okay, so the thing is that if you find that or even say, or even you can talk about the interest rate in the banks, okay, of the bank account. If you keep money in the bank, obviously that money goes to loan. Okay, as we have seen in the previous chapter, whenever you deposit some money in some account, some money is kept as the required reserves and the other remaining money is given out as loans, right? And from that loan, the returns, that loan is usually used in some business. Okay, so from there the return that you will get, usually that amount is adjusted with the interest rate that you will get in the bank. So ask yourself this question: there should be a negative relationship between that interest rate and the demand for money. The reason being, if the interest rate increases, then you as a person will have more tendency to keep the money in the bank so that it goes for loan rather than demanding money, right? Rather than demanding money to use it yourself, you will keep the money in the bank so that you earn more interest rate if the interest rate increases. However, if the interest rate decreases, then you will probably think it's not worth it to to keep the money in the bank and get interest rate because the interest is so low. So you will rather demand money to use it for consumption. Okay, so do you understand why the demand curve is downward sloping for money and what relationship it has with interest rate? Any problem? Okay, so please go through whatever is written here. They have basically the same thing what I just discussed is written here. Okay, so remember this interest rate that you can see in the y axis. This is basically say the interest rate of the bank that you would get if you give loan, right? So when you have money, either you have the option of using up your money or you can save your money in banks to get interest, right? So which one will you do? The answer is if the interest rate is high enough, you will demand less money for consumption and you will keep more money in the banks. But if the interest rate is low, then you will demand more money, thinking it's rather better for me to spend my money than keep my money for a small amount of interest. Okay, hence you see the demand for money is downward sloping.
ম্যাম, if the interest rate is high, then তো মানুষ
Mhm.
চাবে যে লোন দিতে, অন্যকে লোন দিতে।
Yeah, yeah,
আর
correct.
ওইটা,
So if it wants to give loan, it has to demand less money, right?
yes ম্যাম।
Exactly. So that's why you see there is a negative relationship between demand and the quantity of money and interest rate. Okay. All right. So if that is clear, let's go to money supply now. Okay. So remember I told you we'll look at money demand and supply. So yeah, we have I think 2 minutes left. So let's hurry up. So money supply. So you can see the supply of money. Okay, the money supply curve shows the how the quantity of money supplied changes with the interest rate. So again, the same thing we are looking at, but this time we are looking at the supply of money. That is, when the interest rate changes, what happens to the supply of money? So you can see very interestingly, the supply of money in any modern economy is controlled by the central bank or some monetary authority. For us, of course, it is Bangladesh Bank, the central bank. Thus, the supply of money is determined by the central bank and it's not affected by the interest rate. Hence, the supply curve of money is a vertical line. So you see, this supply of money is actually a vertical line fixed at some quantity. So you see, this supply, how much will be supplied is actually decided by the central bank. Okay, it doesn't change with interest rate. Interest rate has no effect on the supply curve of money. Okay, so in Bangladesh also this is the case, that the supply of money is fixed at a time. Supply of money is fixed, but if the central bank wants, it can definitely increase the supply or decrease the supply. In that case, the supply of money will shift to the right or it may shift to the left. Okay, now that we are familiar with the supply curve and the demand curve for money, we want to now look at the money market itself. Remember, market means demand supply together. So you can see that if I bring the supply and demand of money together, you can see that they meet at one point here. This is called the equilibrium point. You're all familiar with this. And you see this quantity, this interest is the equilibrium interest rate, and this amount is the equilibrium quantity, yes, but this is also the money that is being determined by the central bank. Okay, and this is the exact amount that the central bank has decided to supply money. Okay, but what is important is this I here, I star, this should be I star. Okay, so this is the equilibrium point and this is the equilibrium point, and corresponding interest rate is the equilibrium interest rate. At this equilibrium point, there is no excess supply of money, there is no excess demand of money. Okay, there is equilibrium, so the quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. We don't have any more time, so we can end our class here at slide number 4. Okay, in the next class we will continue from here, and hopefully we will be able to finish this chapter. Okay, so I'm going to stop my recording. In the meantime, you can, okay, there's someone who is saying, okay, some people had net problem, internet problem, and electricity problem. No problem, because remember, I'm recording these classes, so I'll send you the recording. You can just go through those parts that you have missed. Okay, that's not a problem. And Abdul Ahad, you missed the roll call. Okay, Abdul Ahad, I will give you your, I think I have given already, but I'll remember to do it, don't worry. Okay, if you have any question, you may ask now.